There was a time when people understood that the value of a career could not always be measured by salary, status, or the size of an office. Some people built houses, some people managed companies, and some people helped children find their voice in a world that had never taken the time to understand them. But on one unforgettable afternoon, a husband named Trevor Collins laughed at his wife's career in front of hundreds of people. The Family Feud studio was bright, loud, and full of excitement. Music played as Steve Harvey walked onto the stage. The audience rose to welcome him. Two families stood behind their podiums, smiling and waving toward the cameras. On one side was the Collins family from Columbus, Ohio. Trevor Collins stood in the captain's position. He was 49 years old and owned a successful roofing company. He wore a dark blue suit, polished shoes, and the confident smile of a man who was comfortable receiving attention. Beside him stood his wife, Rachel. Rachel was 46 years old. She wore a yellow dress and a small silver bracelet covered with colorful beads. Their 23-year-old daughter, Emily, stood next to her. Trevor's younger brother, Nathan, and Rachel's mother, 70-year-old Carol, completed the family team. Steve began introducing them one by one. When he reached Trevor, the conversation was easy. "What do you do, sir?" Steve asked. "I own Collins Roofing and Restoration." "How many employees?" 32. The audience applauded. Steve nodded. "That is a serious company." Trevor smiled proudly. "We worked hard to build it." Steve moved toward Rachel. "And what do you do?" Rachel leaned toward the microphone. "I'm a special education teacher." The audience applauded again. Steve smiled. "What age group?" "Mostly children between 7 and 11. Before Rachel could say anything more, Trevor began laughing. Steve looked toward him. "What is funny?" Trevor waved one hand. "Nothing. She always makes it sound so official." Rachel's smile disappeared. Steve looked at her, then back at Trevor. "What do you mean?" "She works with kids all day." "That sounds official." Trevor continued laughing. "She sings songs, plays games, and hands out stickers. She calls it a career." The audience became quieter. Rachel looked down at the podium. Emily turned toward her father. "Dad." Trevor ignored her. Steve's expression changed. "What do you call it?" Trevor shrugged. "Professional babysitting." A few people in the audience gasped. Rachel's mother closed her eyes. Steve slowly lowered his question card. He studied Trevor's face. "You just called your wife's career professional babysitting?" Trevor smiled as though everyone should understand the joke. "I love my wife. But let's be honest, some jobs are harder than others." Rachel's hands tightened around the edge of the podium. Steve looked at her. "Do you think your job is easy?" Rachel tried to answer. Trevor interrupted. "She gets summers off." The studio became completely silent. Steve turned toward him. "I asked your wife." Trevor raised his hands. "I'm just giving context." Steve stared at him for several seconds. Then he looked at Rachel's bracelet. Each bead had a different letter printed on it. "What is that?" he asked. Rachel touched the bracelet. "My students made it for me." Trevor laughed again. "See? Beads and stickers." This time, nobody laughed with him. What Trevor did not know was that the bracelet represented something far more important than a classroom activity. Each bead had been made by a child who had struggled to communicate. Some of those children had never spoken a full sentence before entering Rachel's classroom. Others had been removed from schools that did not understand their needs. Rachel had spent 21 years helping children learn how to express fear, pain, joy, and hope. She had also used those same skills to help someone in Trevor's own family, a person Trevor rarely mentioned when discussing his success. Before the game ended, Steve would ask Rachel to explain what her work actually involved. Her answer would reveal years of sacrifice. Emily would expose a painful family secret, and a surprise guest in the audience would prove that Rachel had done far more than hand out stickers. Trevor believed his company made him the most important person in the family, but by the end of that afternoon, Steve Harvey would show him the truth. A roof could protect a building from a storm. Rachel's work had protected children from believing they had no place in the world. Rachel Collins had wanted to become a teacher since she was 9 years old. Her younger brother, Daniel, was born with significant developmental disabilities. Doctors told Rachel's parents that Daniel might never speak clearly, live independently, or attend a regular school. Some relatives treated him as if he could not understand anything. Other children stared at him. Adults often spoke about him while he was standing in the room. Rachel noticed that Daniel became frustrated when people assumed silence meant he had no thoughts. She began communicating with him through pictures. She drew simple cards representing food, toys, emotions, and places. When Daniel wanted water, he could point to a cup. When he felt afraid, he could point to a frightened face. When he wanted to go outside, he could select a picture of the backyard. The cards reduced his frustration. They also revealed how much he had been trying to communicate. Rachel's mother, Carol, watched her children work together at the kitchen table. "You are helping him find a door," she told Rachel. "A door to what?" "To the rest of the world." Daniel eventually learned to use short sentences. He attended school with support and developed a love for music. He never lived completely independently, but he worked part-time at a local library for many years. Rachel understood that her brother's progress had not come from one miracle. It came from patience, repetition, professional support, and people who refused to give up on him. After high school, Rachel studied special education. She completed additional training in communication disorders, behavioral support, and inclusive teaching. Her first job was at an underfunded public school. The classroom had old furniture, limited supplies, and not enough staff. Rachel used her own money to purchase picture cards, sensory toys, headphones, books, and art materials. She stayed late to prepare individual lessons. Each child learned differently. One student could read difficult words but became overwhelmed by loud sounds. Another child spoke very little but understood almost every instruction. One student threw objects when she became frustrated because she did not have another way to communicate. Rachel did not call the children difficult. She asked what they were trying to express. She taught families how to use visual schedules at home. She worked with speech therapists, psychologists, and classroom assistants. She celebrated progress that other people might consider small. A child asking for help instead of screaming. A student sitting through a school assembly for 10 minutes. A girl allowing another child to share her crayons. A boy saying his own name clearly for the first time. To Rachel, those moments were not small. They were doors opening. She met Trevor when she was 25. Trevor worked for a roofing contractor at the time. He was ambitious and energetic. He admired Rachel's kindness and enjoyed hearing stories about her students. During the early years of their relationship, he respected her work. When they married, he sometimes helped her carry classroom supplies. He attended school fundraisers. He told friends that Rachel had more patience than anyone he knew. For several years, they were happy. Their daughter, Emily, was born 3 years after the wedding. Rachel returned to teaching after maternity leave. Trevor began accepting private roofing jobs on weekends. He wanted to start his own company. Rachel supported him. She helped design the first advertisements. She answered customer calls when he was on job sites. She used part of her teacher's salary to purchase insurance and equipment. During the company's first 2 years, Rachel's income paid most of the household expenses. Trevor worked long hours, but the business was not immediately profitable. Rachel never embarrassed him. When relatives asked how the company was doing, she said it was growing. When Trevor felt discouraged, she reminded him that building something took time. Eventually, Collins Roofing and Restoration became successful. Trevor hired employees. He purchased company vehicles. He moved into a large office. As his income increased, his attitude toward Rachel's work slowly changed. At first, the comments sounded playful. "You still getting paid to color? How was recess? Did the children let you take a nap today?" Rachel laughed along because she did not want to appear sensitive. Then the jokes became sharper. When Rachel stayed late for a parent meeting, Trevor complained, "You are giving them too much of your time." When she spent her own money on classroom materials, he became angry. "Why are we paying for other people's children?" When she attended training during the summer, he said she was pretending to be busy. "You're a teacher. You're supposed to be on vacation." Rachel tried to explain that special education teachers often completed planning, paperwork, training, and family meetings outside normal school hours. Trevor did not listen. His company made several times more than Rachel's salary. He began measuring value only through income. At business dinners, he introduced himself as an entrepreneur. He introduced Rachel as a school teacher. Sometimes he added, "She has the easy job." People often laughed politely. Rachel smiled beside him. But each joke made her feel smaller. The deepest conflict involved their daughter. When Emily was 4, she stopped speaking in certain situations. At home, she could talk. At preschool, she remained completely silent. Teachers assumed she was shy. Trevor said she would grow out of it. Rachel recognized that something more serious might be happening. After assessments, Emily was diagnosed with selective mutism, an anxiety disorder that made speaking extremely difficult in specific environments. Trevor rejected the diagnosis. "She talks at home," he said. "There is nothing wrong with her." Rachel tried to explain that Emily was not choosing silence. Anxiety was blocking her ability to speak. Trevor became frustrated. "You are turning our daughter into one of your students. I am trying to help her. She needs discipline. She needs support." Trevor insisted that Emily should be forced to answer adults. Rachel refused. She worked with therapists and teachers. She created a gradual communication plan. At first, Emily communicated at school through drawings and written words. Then she began whispering to one trusted teacher. Later, she spoke to a small group. The process took years. Rachel never pressured her. She celebrated each step. When Emily was 8, she stood in front of her class and read one sentence aloud. Rachel cried in the school parking lot afterward. Trevor attended the event, but did not understand why everyone considered it important. She said one sentence. He said, "For her, that was a mountain. You always make everything dramatic." Rachel looked at him. "You did not see how hard she worked." Emily heard the conversation from the back seat. She never forgot it. As Emily grew older, she became more confident. By high school, she could speak publicly, although anxiety remained part of her life. She credited her mother for helping her. Trevor described her progress differently. "She finally stopped being shy," he told people. Rachel did not correct him. But Emily understood exactly what her mother had done. Years later, Rachel's career became even more demanding. The district created a specialized classroom for children who had experienced repeated school failures. Some had been suspended from other programs. Some had communication disorders. Some became physically aggressive when overwhelmed. Many arrived believing they were bad children. Rachel refused to describe them that way. She worked with each student to understand the cause of their behavior. She created safe spaces in the classroom. She taught breathing techniques. She gave students choices. She trained staff to recognize signs of sensory overload. Her classroom became known as a place where difficult situations became manageable. One student named Marcus arrived when he was 9. Marcus had autism and severe anxiety. He had been removed from 2 schools after hitting teachers and running from classrooms. His mother, Keisha, was exhausted and frightened. At their first meeting, she told Rachel, "Every school says he is a problem." Rachel looked at Marcus, who was sitting under a table with his hands over his ears. "He is not a problem," she said. "He is a child having a problem." That sentence changed Keisha's life. Rachel learned that Marcus became overwhelmed by fluorescent lights, loud voices, and unexpected changes. She adjusted the environment. She taught him to use a card that said, "I need a break." She helped him communicate before his fear became aggression. For months, progress was slow. Then one morning, Marcus entered the classroom, handed Rachel the break card, and walked calmly to the quiet area. He had recognized his own distress. He had communicated. He had prevented a crisis. Rachel later cried in the staff bathroom because she understood how important that moment was. Within 2 years, Marcus returned to a general classroom for most of the school day. He joined the school robotics club. He began speaking about becoming an engineer. Keisha called Rachel the teacher who gave her son back his future. Trevor called it another story about one of Rachel's problem kids. Rachel stopped sharing details with him. She realized that he did not want to understand. A month before the family's Family Feud appearance, Rachel received a district award for teaching excellence. The award recognized her work creating communication systems for students with complex needs. She was invited to speak at a statewide education conference. Rachel placed the award letter on the kitchen counter. Trevor glanced at it. Does it come with more money? No. Then it is just a piece of paper. It means the district recognized my work. Trevor opened the refrigerator. That's nice. Rachel stood in silence. 21 years of work had been reduced to that's nice. Later that night, Emily found the letter in the recycling bin. She removed it and placed it safely in her room. When she submitted the family's Family Feud application, Emily wrote that her mother was the heart of the family. She hoped a few days together might remind Trevor of the woman he had once respected. Instead, the bright lights and live audience gave Trevor a larger stage on which to mock her. And this time, Rachel's family was no longer willing to remain silent. The first round began with a question that made the audience laugh. Name something children do that makes adults lose their patience. Trevor reached the buzzer first. Talk back. The answer appeared on the board but was not number one. The opposing family captain answered throw a tantrum, which was higher. The opposing family chose to play. They found several answers before receiving 3 strikes. The Collins family had a chance to steal. Trevor gathered his family. Emily suggested ask the same question repeatedly. Nathan suggested make a mess. Carol suggested refuse to go to bed. Rachel said, they don't listen. Trevor immediately chose Nathan's answer. Make a mess. The buzzer sounded. Wrong, the opposing family kept the points. Steve revealed the final answer. Don't listen. The audience reacted. Rachel looked at Trevor. He avoided her eyes. Steve pointed toward Rachel. She had it. Trevor laughed. She works with children. She should know something. Rachel's smile disappeared. Steve looked at him. She knew the answer. It is one answer. The game continued. The next question was, name something teachers need a lot of. The Collins family won control. Emily answered patience. It was the number one answer. Carol answered energy. Nathan answered coffee. All 3 appeared. Steve moved to Rachel. What do teachers need a lot of? Preparation. The bell rang. The answer was on the board. Trevor leaned toward his microphone. She should have said vacation time. A few members of the audience groaned. Steve looked at him. You really believe teachers are always on vacation? I'm saying they have a good schedule. Rachel shook her head. We do not stop working when students leave. Trevor laughed. You do not work like people in construction. Rachel looked at him. I never said I did. No, but teachers love talking about how tired they are. Steve stepped closer. Brother, what time does your wife leave home? Trevor shrugged. I don't know. Early, Rachel answered. 6:15. What time do you return? Usually after 5. Later during meetings. And do you work at home? Most evenings. Steve looked at Trevor. That sounds like work. Trevor smiled. She fills out forms. Rachel's voice became quieter. Individual education plans are not just forms. Trevor waved one hand. It is paperwork. The audience grew uncomfortable. Steve asked Rachel, what is an individual education plan? It is a legal and educational plan for a student with a disability. It explains the child's needs, goals, services, and support. How long does one take? It depends. Sometimes many hours. And the plan has to be reviewed with the family and specialists. How many students? 12 directly. I also support other teachers. Steve looked at Trevor. That is 12 children with individual plans. Trevor shrugged. My company has 32 employees. Steve nodded. And do you want your wife laughing at your work because she has fewer people? Trevor became defensive. That is different. Why? Because roofing is dangerous. Rachel answered calmly. So is working with a child who is having a violent crisis. Trevor laughed again. They are children. Rachel's expression changed. Yes, they are frightened children. Steve noticed the pain in her voice. The round continued. Trevor gave a wrong answer. The family eventually cleared the board when Rachel provided the final response. Support. The Collins family won the points. As the music played, Steve asked Emily about her career. I'm studying speech-language pathology. Steve smiled. What made you choose that? Emily looked at her mother. She did. Trevor interrupted. Emily was always going into healthcare. Emily shook her head. No, Dad. I chose it because of Mom. Steve asked, how? Emily took a breath. I had selective mutism when I was young. Trevor immediately stepped toward the microphone. She was shy. Emily looked at him. No, I had an anxiety disorder. You grew out of it. I received years of therapy and support. Trevor smiled toward the audience. She is fine now. Emily's voice became firmer. Because Mom helped me. The studio became quiet. Trevor looked embarrassed. We do not need to discuss your childhood problems on television. Steve turned toward him. Why not? Because it makes everything sound more serious than it was. Emily stared at her father. I could not speak at school. You spoke at home. That does not mean I was fine. Rachel reached for Emily's hand. Trevor shook his head. Rachel filled your head with labels. Emily's eyes filled with tears. She gave me ways to communicate when I could not talk. Trevor leaned toward her. You are remembering it wrong. Steve raised one hand. Do not tell a grown woman how to remember her own childhood. The audience applauded. Trevor's face tightened. This is a game show. Everybody is getting emotional. Steve looked at Rachel. What did you do to help your daughter? Rachel hesitated. She had never wanted to make Emily's condition public without permission. Emily squeezed her hand. It is okay. Rachel spoke carefully. We worked with a therapist. We built small steps. We did not force her to speak. At first, she used cards and writing. Then she whispered to one person. Later she spoke in small groups. How long did that take? Several years. Steve looked at Emily. And now you are studying communication? Yes, because of what your mother did? Emily nodded. I want to help children the way she helped me. The audience stood and applauded. Rachel began crying. Trevor remained still. After the applause settled, he said, I paid for the therapy. The entire studio reacted. Emily looked at him in disbelief. Steve slowly turned toward Trevor. What did you say? I said I supported it financially. Rachel wiped her eyes. No one said you did not. I'm just explaining that we both helped. Emily stared at him. You just spent 10 minutes saying her work was not real. Trevor looked toward the audience. You all are twisting my words. Steve stepped closer. No, we are listening to them. The third round began. The question was, name someone a child might remember for the rest of their life. The opposing family answered first, but received 3 strikes. The Collins family had a chance to steal. The family discussed the answer. Carol suggested grandparent. Nathan suggested coach. Emily suggested teacher. Rachel agreed. Trevor shook his head. The obvious answer is parent. Emily said, parent might already be on the board. It is still stronger. Rachel quietly said, teacher. Trevor ignored her. The family answered parent. The buzzer sounded. Wrong. The opposing family kept the points. Steve revealed the remaining answer. Teacher. The audience applauded Rachel. Trevor became irritated. You cannot build a show around proving my wife right. Steve looked at him. I am revealing survey answers. Every question suddenly connects to her job. That is because her answers keep being right. The audience laughed. Trevor crossed his arms. Rachel looked embarrassed. Steve approached her. Tell me about one student you remember. Trevor shook his head. We are going to be here all day. Steve turned sharply toward him. You have spoken enough. The studio became quiet. Steve looked back at Rachel. One student. Rachel touched the bracelet on her wrist. There was a boy named Marcus. She explained that Marcus had been removed from 2 schools. She did not share private medical details, but she described a child who was overwhelmed, frightened, and unable to communicate before reaching a crisis. When I met him, he spent most of the day under a table, Rachel said. People believed he was refusing to cooperate. What did you believe? I believed he was protecting himself. Trevor muttered, here comes the inspirational story. Steve heard him. The audience heard him. Rachel stopped speaking. Steve walked toward Trevor. Why are you doing that? Trevor looked surprised. Doing what? Every time this woman explains her work, you laugh. I know the reality. What reality? She acts like she is saving the world. Rachel looked at him. I have never said that. You come home talking about every small thing a child did like it was a medical miracle. Rachel's eyes filled with tears. For some children, saying one word is a major achievement. Trevor rolled his eyes. That is exactly what I mean. Steve placed his cards on the podium. The game stopped. Brother, let me ask you something. Trevor looked at him. When your roofing company completes a difficult project, do you talk about it? Of course. Do you take pictures? Yes. Do you show customers? Yes. Do you celebrate your employees? Sometimes. Then why is she not allowed to celebrate progress in her work? Because putting on a roof is a real result. The audience gasped. Rachel stared at him. Steve's expression became hard. And helping a child communicate is not? Trevor shrugged. It is not the same. No, it is not. Steve stepped closer. A roof protects a building. Her work can protect a life. Trevor laughed nervously. That is dramatic. Before Steve could answer, a voice came from the audience. No, it isn't. Everyone turned. A woman in the second row had stood up. Rachel recognized her immediately. Keisha? The woman was Marcus's mother. Emily had invited her to attend the recording, but she had not told Rachel. Beside Keisha stood a tall teenage boy wearing glasses and a dark jacket. Marcus. Rachel covered her mouth. The audience became silent. Steve looked toward the producers, then toward Keisha. You know this family? Keisha nodded. Mrs. Collins taught my son. Steve invited them onto the stage. Marcus walked slowly beside his mother. When he reached Rachel, he hugged her. Rachel began crying. You have gotten so tall. Marcus smiled. I'm 15 now. Steve asked Keisha why she had spoken. Keisha looked at Trevor. Because he said her work was not a real result. She placed one hand on her son's shoulder. When Marcus entered Mrs. Collins's class, he had been suspended more times than I could count. Schools kept calling me to take him home. Her voice began to shake. People told me he was dangerous. One administrator told me I should consider a residential program because regular school might never work. Marcus looked down. Keisha continued. Mrs. Collins did not ask what was wrong with my son. She asked what was happening to him. Rachel wiped her tears. She noticed that the lights hurt him. She noticed that loud rooms frightened him. She taught him to ask for a break before he became overwhelmed. Steve looked at Marcus. What are you doing now? I'm in 10th grade. How are your grades? Mostly A's. The audience applauded. Marcus smiled shyly. I'm also in the robotics club. What do you want to become? An engineer. The applause grew louder. Keisha looked at Rachel. My son has a future because you refuse to treat him like a problem. Rachel shook her head. Marcus did the work. You showed him how. Keisha then turned toward Trevor. You said she hands out stickers. Trevor looked uncomfortable. Keisha continued. One of those stickers is still on my refrigerator. She reached into her bag and removed a small laminated card. It read, Marcus asked for help today. It was the first day my son communicated before having a crisis, she said. Mrs. Collins sent this home because she knew I needed hope. The audience stood. Rachel covered her face and cried. Marcus held her hand. Steve allowed the applause to continue. When the room finally became quiet, he turned toward Trevor. You still think this is babysitting? Trevor looked around the studio. He had no answer. Steve pointed toward Marcus. That young man is standing here telling you what your wife's work did. Trevor swallowed. One student does not represent an entire career. The audience reacted angrily. Rachel looked at him as though something inside her had finally broken. Steve stared at Trevor. One student should be enough. Trevor shook his head. You are all making me the villain because I made a joke. No, Steve replied. You are making yourself look small because you cannot stand seeing your wife look important. The audience erupted. Trevor's face became red. That is not true. Then tell us why you have dismissed every achievement she mentioned. I work hard too. Nobody said you didn't. My business supports our family. Rachel spoke quietly. My salary supported us when you started that business. Trevor turned toward her. That was years ago. Emily stepped forward. Mom paid the mortgage for almost 2 years. Trevor pointed toward her. Stay out of our finances. Nathan finally spoke. She also answered customer calls. Trevor looked at his brother. Not you too. Nathan continued. She helped create the first schedules. She handled invoices because you did not know how. I learned. Because she taught you. The audience applauded. Rachel looked at Trevor. I never used that against you. Trevor became defensive. I did not ask you to. You did ask me. He stopped speaking. Rachel continued. You asked me to believe in your career before it made any money. The room became quiet. I believed in you when relatives said the company would fail. I used my salary to pay bills. I spent evenings answering calls after teaching all day. Trevor looked down. Rachel's voice trembled. I never called your work a hobby. I never called you a man playing with tools. I never laughed when you were proud of finishing a project. Trevor tried to respond. Steve lifted one hand. Let her finish. Rachel looked at her husband. I only wanted the same respect. Trevor stood in silence. The audience waited. Rachel removed the colorful bracelet from her wrist and held it carefully. My students made this after I received a district teaching award. Trevor looked at it. You never told me that. Emily stared at him. She did. Rachel nodded. I placed the letter on the kitchen counter. Trevor's expression changed slightly. You said it did not matter because there was no extra money. Emily reached into her purse. She removed the award letter she had saved from the recycling bin. I found this after Dad threw it away. Trevor turned toward her. I did not throw it away on purpose. It was in the recycling bin under other papers. Steve took the letter. He read part of it silently. Then he looked at Rachel. This says you were recognized for creating communication programs now being used across several schools. Rachel nodded. Steve looked toward Trevor. Beads and stickers? Trevor said nothing. Steve held up the letter. This woman helped create a system that other teachers are using to help children communicate. He pointed toward Marcus. A child who once hid under a table is now planning to become an engineer. He pointed toward Emily. Your own daughter chose her career because of what her mother did for her. He placed the letter on the podium. And your response was to throw the recognition away because it did not come with more money. Trevor looked toward Rachel. I did not understand. Steve's voice became firm. You did not try to understand. The audience applauded. Trevor tried to speak. Steve raised one hand. No, you have talked over her career all afternoon. The studio became quiet. Now you are going to listen. Steve turned toward Rachel. What does teaching these children require? Rachel took a breath. Patience, training, planning, teamwork, and humility. What is the hardest part? Knowing a child is hurting and not always being able to fix it quickly. What keeps you doing it? The moment a child realizes they are not broken. Several people in the audience began crying. Steve looked at Trevor. You build roofs. Trevor nodded slowly. That matters. People need safe homes. Steve pointed toward Rachel. She builds a place inside children where shame cannot live. The audience stood for Rachel. Marcus and Keisha hugged her again. Trevor remained behind the podium. When the applause ended, Steve spoke directly to him. Success did not make your wife's career smaller. Trevor looked at him. It made you forget who believed in yours. Trevor's face softened. Steve continued, a man does not become greater by mocking the person beside him. If your wife's light bothers you, the answer is not to turn it off. He pointed toward Rachel. The answer is to become the kind of husband who can stand beside it. Trevor lowered his head. Steve turned toward Rachel. You still want to play? Rachel wiped her face. Yes. Steve looked at Trevor. You are moving out of the captain's position. Trevor looked surprised. What? Rachel is the captain now. The audience erupted. Trevor began to protest. Steve immediately stopped him. No, Trevor stared at him. You have had the microphone all day. Steve pointed one position down the line. Move. The firmness in Steve's voice ended the argument. Trevor stepped away. Rachel moved into the captain's position. She looked nervous. Marcus smiled at her. You taught me how to do hard things. Rachel nodded. Steve resumed the game. The final round was worth triple points. Steve called Rachel and the opposing family captain to the buzzer. Name something a good teacher gives a student. Rachel pressed the buzzer. Confidence. The board rang. It was the number one answer. The audience exploded. Rachel closed her eyes as tears ran down her face. The Collins family chose to play. Emily answered knowledge. Nathan answered support. Carol answered patience. All three appeared. Trevor's turn came. Steve stood beside him. Name something a good teacher gives a student. Trevor looked toward Rachel. For the first time that day, he appeared to think about her work seriously. Hope, he answered. The bell rang. Hope appeared on the board. The audience applauded. Rachel looked at him. Trevor gave a small nod. One answer remained. The family received 2 strikes before the question returned to Rachel. Steve repeated it, something a good teacher gives a student. Rachel looked at Marcus. She looked at Emily. Then she answered. A voice. The board rang. The final answer appeared. The Collins family won the game. Confetti filled the stage. Emily ran to her mother. Carol, Nathan, Marcus, and Keisha joined the celebration. Trevor stepped forward slowly. He did not force his way into the center. He waited until Rachel looked toward him. Then he joined the family embrace. Rachel and Emily were selected for fast money. Emily played first and earned 133 points. Rachel needed 67 points to win $20,000. Steve stood beside her. Ready? Rachel looked at her bracelet. Yes, the clock began. Name something a child might be afraid to do in class. Speak. Name something every teacher keeps on a desk. Pencils. Name something people need when learning a new skill. Patience. Name a person who can change a child's life. Teacher. Name something more valuable than money. Purpose. The buzzer sounded. Steve smiled. Strong answers. The results appeared one by one. Speak earned 29 points. Pencils earned 24. Patience earned 31. The family passed 200 points before the final 2 answers were shown. They had won $20,000. The audience erupted. Rachel covered her face. Emily hugged her. Steve handed Rachel the prize card. What will you do with the money? Rachel looked toward Marcus and Keisha. I want to create a classroom support fund. Steve nodded. What would it provide? Communication devices, sensory equipment, books, and training for families who cannot afford them. The audience applauded. Anything for yourself? Rachel smiled. I would like to attend the statewide education conference. Emily laughed through her tears. You were invited to speak there. Steve looked surprised. You were invited as a speaker? Rachel nodded. Trevor stared at her. You were? Yes, when? Next month. You never told me. Rachel looked at him sadly. I stopped telling you about things you always mocked. The studio became quiet. Trevor lowered his eyes. Steve looked directly at him. That is what disrespect costs. Trevor nodded. It makes people stop sharing their life with you. He stepped toward Rachel. Can I say something? Rachel looked at Steve. Steve nodded toward her. That decision belongs to you. Rachel allowed Trevor to speak. He faced her. I thought because my company earned more money, my work carried more weight. Rachel listened. Trevor continued. I used jokes to make your career seem smaller, but I think I did that because your work had a purpose mine did not always have. Steve interrupted gently. Do not make your work meaningless either. Trevor looked at him. Your company matters. The problem was never that one career mattered, and the other did not. Trevor nodded. The problem was that I needed mine to matter more. Rachel's eyes filled with tears. Trevor looked at Marcus, Emily, and Keisha. I am sorry. Then he looked back at his wife. You believed in me before my company existed. I should have believed in you even when I did not understand your work. Rachel took a breath. Apologizing here is easy. Trevor nodded slowly. I know. Respecting my career after the cameras stop will be harder. You are right. Rachel did not immediately embrace him. She simply nodded. That is where we start. After the recording, Rachel returned home with mixed emotions. She was proud of what had happened. She was also exhausted. For years she had ignored Trevor's jokes because each one seemed too small to justify a major argument. But when she considered them together, they formed a painful pattern. Trevor had mocked her schedule, he had dismissed her training, he had thrown away her award letter, he had reduced her students' achievements to games and stickers. He had treated her salary as less important even though it had supported their family during the company's early years. Rachel told Trevor that one public apology would not repair everything. She wanted marriage counseling. She also wanted clear changes at home. Trevor would stop joking about her career. He would attend the statewide education conference. He would visit her classroom after receiving permission from the school. He would also learn what her work actually involved. Trevor agreed. At first, Rachel was not sure whether he truly understood or simply wanted the conflict to end. Then he attended the conference. Rachel stood before hundreds of teachers, therapists, and administrators. She spoke about communication systems for children experiencing anxiety, autism, and emotional overload. She explained that behavior often communicated needs a child could not express with words. Trevor sat in the audience. He watched professionals take notes while Rachel spoke. He watched teachers line up afterward to ask questions. One principal told Rachel that her strategies had reduced classroom removals in his school. A speech therapist thanked her for creating resources that families could easily use at home. Trevor began understanding that Rachel was not simply respected by a few emotional parents. She was an expert. Later that evening, he apologized again. "I thought you were attending meetings where teachers complained about school." Rachel looked at him. "You never asked." "I know. That is the problem." The following week, Trevor visited Rachel's classroom. He expected to see children coloring and playing. Instead, he saw carefully planned learning stations. He saw visual schedules on the walls. He watched one student use a tablet to communicate. He saw Rachel calmly support a child who became overwhelmed by a fire drill. She lowered her voice, reduced the child's sensory stress, and helped him return to the classroom safely. The entire process required skill, patience, and complete attention. At lunchtime, Trevor sat beside Rachel. "I would not last 2 hours here." Rachel smiled slightly. "You would learn." "No, I mean it. This is difficult." "Yes, I am sorry I needed to see it before believing you." Rachel looked at him. "You lived with me for 21 years. Trevor lowered his head. "I know." The $20,000 prize helped create the Open Door Classroom Fund. The name came from Carol's words about helping Daniel find a door to the world. The fund provided communication tablets, visual materials, sensory equipment, and family training.